Hey folks, Erick Stakelbeck here. Welcome to another Watchman Newscast live stream. I'm so excited because there was a lot of travel in the month of August, and believe me, there's more travel coming up in September and October, but we were a little behind on our live streams in August because it seemed I was on the road or in an airplane when we would usually be doing our live stream. But good news, this September, we are uninterrupted. We should be good to go every Wednesday, 4 p.m. Eastern time, of course, with our Watchman Newscast live streams, where we come to you live. We're taking questions and answers, getting to know each other a bit better, which I always like, and hitting on the major news of the day, in particular coming out of the Middle East and how it affects you no matter where you live. So, hey, let's get right into it. We've got breaking news. Well, breaking as of late yesterday, but still very fresh, and still more news coming out of that news event yesterday when Israeli fighter jets struck the Aleppo airport in northwestern Syria for the second time in the past week. Not only that, this was a very effective strike. The Aleppo airport, folks, is now shut down, according to Syrian authorities, and they're calling this a war crime by Israel. But you could argue that Syria hosting willingly the Iranian regime, Hezbollah, and other terror proxies knowingly on Syrian soil and allowing them to set up a beachhead from which they can attack Israel, and also to develop various advanced weapons like precision-guided missiles. I think you could call that a war crime in and of itself, but I digress. We'll be talking about all of that today. The Aleppo airport strike, what comes next. Of course, back in June, Israel shut down through airstrikes Damascus International Airport as well. Why is Aleppo now a target? And some commenters, anti-Israel commenters, have said this is a war crime. Look at big bad Israel instigating all of this. Well, what exactly was going on at Damascus International Airport and at Aleppo International Airport in order for Israel to take such drastic action? Was it just Aunt Millie visiting for the holidays, or was it something far more sinister coming through the airports in Damascus and Aleppo? We'll break that down in a minute. I also want to talk about the massive war games. There have been a lot of war games recently, right? We've documented them here on the newscast, whether it's in Iran with these drone drills, whether Venezuela a few weeks ago with war games in which Russian and Chinese troops were right here where I'm sitting right now in the Western Hemisphere, taking part in these war games in Venezuela. And of course, Russia has held multiple war games along with China. And yet again this week in Russia's Far East, thousands of Chinese soldiers were on Russian territory, along with those from Syria and former Soviet nations, for these large Vostok, so-called 2022 war games, which Vladimir Putin personally visited and observed yesterday. We'll talk about the implications there. Also, it never goes away, does it, folks? The Iran nuclear deal. We've literally been talking about the Iranian nuclear crisis now for over 2 decades. Some have described it, rightly so, I believe, as the Cuban Missile Crisis in slow motion. That's exactly what we have with this Iranian nuclear crisis. A very apt description there. But what's the latest? We've been telling you here in the newscast, hey, this thing is imminent. I believe it still is, but is imminent tomorrow, or is imminent now right after the U.S. midterm elections in November 8th? 2 months away, to me, is still reasonably imminent. Here's the bottom line. The Biden administration, I do not use this word lightly, is obsessed, as is the European Union, to striking a new deal. But it appears right now, as I come to you on Wednesday, September 7th, 4 p.m. Eastern time, that the negotiations between the Iranian regime and the West have now hit another snag. I don't think it's an insurmountable snag. Sadly, I do believe this deal will eventually go through. We'll break down the latest there, and some good news, some encouraging news. How about that? Isn't that nice, as we're talking about the world's worst actors, rogue regimes, terrorists? 2 amazing archaeological discoveries over the past week in Israel. Hey, if you watch a newscast on a regular basis, you know that we love biblical history and archaeology, history in general, really, but in particular, biblical history and archaeology. And I am very privileged to be able to get on the ground in Israel and points beyond on a regular basis and get my hands on these 2,000 or even 2,700-year-old biblical artifacts. Folks, I pinch myself every time I'm there. It never gets old, believe me. And we've got two brand new ones that are really fascinating that I think you will like, that bring the Bible to life in 2022. I like to say that when you combine the truth of the Bible, the truth of God's word, scripture, with irrefutable archaeological and scientific evidence, then you have an unbeatable combination in my view. We'll dig into that today as well. As you can tell, we've got a lot to talk about. Let's dig into it. We'll start with Aleppo, but I just want to give everyone a shout out who's watching right now from around the world, as always, from literally every continent. I like to say we've got some penguins in Antarctica huddled around a device watching right now. Welcome, gentlemen and gentlewomen, our penguins down there. But in all seriousness, everyone from around the world watching right now, can't thank you guys enough. We've already got thousands with us. We will have thousands more before our time today is out. This is great. We have Trevor Monteith from Northern Ireland. I am half Irish myself. Good to see that. We've got Texas, good old Texas, love it. Nigeria, British Columbia, Switzerland, Nampa, Idaho. I have a funny story real quick about Nampa, Idaho. Then we will begin with Aleppo. From Nampa to Aleppo, I was in Nampa, Idaho in 1996. It's outside of Boise for a college basketball tournament. My team made the national tournament at the D3 level. We played in Nampa. I vividly remember saying to a teammate, I'm a kid from Northeast Philly, working class neighborhood. I haven't traveled much at the time. And I said, man, I'll never be back here again. 20 years later, almost to the day, a pastor friend of mine calls and says, I knew he lived in Idaho. I didn't know where. And he says, I'd like you to come out and speak. And I said, where are you based? Nampa, Idaho. Come on out. I said, God, you have a sense of humor. 20 years later, almost to the day, I was back in Nampa, Idaho, a place I thought I'd never return to. Only God. God's kind of funny like that sometimes. I think he really does have a great sense of humor. But there's nothing humorous about what's going on in Aleppo right now. Hey, we've documented for you for years, I'd say, certainly in the past several months, how the Iranian regime has been using Damascus International Airport as a transit point. Now, they have been transiting advanced weapons, in particular precision-guided missile parts, through that airport, the Syrian capital. And once the parts arrive in, by the way, not just military transport planes or cargo planes coming from Tehran, but civilian passenger planes. That's the game the Iranian regime is playing now. They're loading up these weapons parts on civilian flights and thinking that that would be a covert type strategy, obviously, that would maybe fly under the radar of Israel. So they've been shipping them in through civilian flights through Damascus International Airport. This has been going on for several months, if not years, really. Fast forward to June 2022. Israel, after repeated warnings, after repeatedly bombing around Damascus International Airport to target not civilians, but targeting these advanced weapons shipments, which would be used to murder Israelis, Israel finally said, this is out of hand, enough is enough, and they bombed the runway at Damascus International Airport. Now, that shut the airport down for at least a week or two. It was up fairly quickly, up and running back again with help from Russia, the Assad regime in Syria's good friends and protectors. So Damascus International Airport is functional once again. Israel, even in the, you would think perhaps that Iran would completely back off, but there's still been those shipments coming into Damascus, even in the wake of that June strike. Israel, again, has taken some action around the airport, but not as many shipments and not as much as we saw, not surprisingly, before the runway was bombed in June, which brings us to Aleppo. Now, back in June, when Damascus International Airport was shut down, I said, hey, folks, keep an eye on Aleppo, the second largest airport in Syria. I believe it may be even larger in terms of population than Damascus, at least these days. in the wake of the Syrian civil war. Aleppo is a very large, very historical city in northwestern Syria, not far from the Turkish border. And previously, Israel had not carried out many strikes in Aleppo. It was kind of far north, a bit removed from the usual theater of action, I guess you would say, where Israel was targeting Iran and its proxies. Well, that all changed last week. And what we predicted in June looks to have become true, sadly, where the Iranian regime now has been bypassing Damascus International Airport because they know eyeballs are on Damascus. Israel is wise to their game there. So Iran has said, we'll send some of these weapon shipments to Aleppo International Airport and see if we have better luck there. Well, Israel last week bombed both airports on the same day. I believe it was last Wednesday or Thursday. It might have been Thursday. It's tough to keep track of these airstrikes in Syria sometimes. There's been, I think, 23 since this year started. There have been hundreds over the past several years alone. Again, Israel for two reasons. Targeting the Iranian regime and Hezbollah, chiefly for two reasons. Number one, to destroy these advanced weapon shipments, in particular precision-guided missile parts, which would be a game changer if Iran, Hezbollah, or if Hezbollah in particular got their hands on them and used them against the Jewish state. And secondly, to push Iran and push Hezbollah back from the Syria-Israel border. Folks, look, Iran wants to establish a permanent beachhead, a permanent foothold on that border right across from Israel's beautiful Golan Heights. They want to duplicate in Syria along the Golan what they have established in southern Lebanon with Hezbollah, a lethal, well-armed, well-trained terrorist entity on Israel's border. Israel says you did it in Lebanon and that's bad enough, and we've got a real problem there, needless to say, but we're not going to allow it in Syria. So that's why you've seen Israel continuously strike at Iran and its proxies in Syria. Now, Aleppo seems to be now being pulled into this. And again, Syria is venting Syrian officials about these Israeli strikes in Aleppo. You can thank your good friends in Tehran, because if Iran wasn't using Aleppo under your noses, Syrian regime, to transport weapons into your country to be used against your neighbor, the state of Israel, then Israel would not be forced to act. Alas, that's exactly what Iran has done. So we had the strikes last week on the same day against Aleppo International Airport and the Damascus, around the Damascus International Airport. Weapon shipments. Once again, we don't have all the particulars, but Iranian weapon shipments are the reports coming out of the region. And then yesterday, once again, this time Israel direct hit, bombed the runway at Aleppo International Airport. Again, Iranian weapons coming through that airport. The Iranian regime is nothing if not determined. I don't say that as a compliment. I would say it is a demonically driven effort to get these weapons into Syria and to use against Israel, a demonic rage and hatred against the Jewish state and the Jewish people by the Iranian regime. That's why you see these continued efforts to transit through Aleppo airport. Now, there's an uproar, again, from Syrian officials. Last week, Syria said, look, Israel, you're setting the region on fire, and this will provoke a wider regional war. These are the warnings now from Syria. And the more that happens in Syria, we're talking Aleppo today, yes, but especially when it comes to Damascus, the more that happens there, the more the footsteps of prophecy. You hear the footsteps of Isaiah 17, which prophesies, look, it's not pleasant for people to hear, but I'm just repeating what the word of God says, that Damascus, one of the oldest inhabited cities in the world, read the book of Isaiah, chapter 17, verse 1 and 2. It says that Damascus will become a ruinous heap and it will cease to be a city. Now, I take no joy in saying that, obviously. I'm just quoting and repeating what the Bible says. And when it comes to Bible prophecy and events in the Bible, there is a 100% accuracy rate. Damascus has never ceased to be a city, even during this civil war, which the Assad regime has largely prevailed in, obviously, with the help of Iran, Hezbollah, and Russia, but kicked off in March 2011, really lasted for the better part of a decade, over 500,000 people killed, many of them women and children, tens of thousands of women and children, civilians. Even during that period, I mean, Damascus has really borne the brunt and taken a lot of heavy hits. It's still a functioning city. It's not a ruinous heap. It has not ceased to function. It has not been completely destroyed. Even the Mongols, who tore through the Middle East, did not completely raze Damascus to the ground. So that has never happened. The city of Damascus has never been a ruinous heap. But the Bible says that there is a day that is coming when that will happen. And every time that you hear about Damascus being a transit point, being a terror hub, you have to sit up a little bit and take notice. Now, Russia did not react well to the bombing of the Damascus airport back in June, in which the runway was destroyed. And although they've been a bit, I don't want to say tight-lipped, but they haven't said much about Aleppo yet, you would think that Russia is going to have something to say about Aleppo. Why do I say that? Hey, for decades, before Bashar al-Assad, to the days of his father, Hafez al-Assad, Russia has been the Assad regime's patron, its benefactor, even during the Soviet days. We're taking it back now to the 1960s, early 70s, when Russia, via the Soviet Union, had a very strong foothold in the Middle East. Now, Vladimir Putin clearly wants to revive those Soviet glory days and expand his reach and territory once again. And folks, if you want to be that kind of global player on the world stage, you must have a presence in the world's most strategic and volatile region, the Middle East. You can see when the book of Ezekiel, chapters 38 and 39, talks about that coming war of Gog and Magog, when a Russian leader will be pulled down to the Middle East, to the mountains of Israel, like he has a hook in his jaw. Not like he has a hook in his jaw. God Almighty says, I will place a hook in your jaw and I will pull you down to the mountains of Israel, and there you will meet your demise. Will that Russian leader be Vladimir Putin, who leads this, what Ezekiel calls latter days, Latter, latter days Confederation of Nations, including, I believe, Russia, Iran, and Turkey, and former Soviet nations? Will Russia lead that confederation? Will Vladimir Putin be at the head of this invasion force? Maybe not on the ground right there, but or will there be a leader coming after Vladimir Putin who's even worse? Great question. Vladimir Putin is 70 years old, and report after report says that he is not in the best health. There's been reports that he's had cancer treatments. We don't know how long Vladimir Putin is for this world. Perhaps he'll be in power another 10, 20, 30, probably not 30, but another 10 years, he'd be 80, 15 years, 85, who knows? But his health has reportedly been declining over the past few years. And will he weather the storm here in Ukraine? Look, folks, we just passed the 6-month anniversary of the Russian invasion, and it has not gone according to plan, clearly. Russia continues to have a knockdown, drag-out battle in Ukraine. And right now there's fighting around a nuclear plant in Ukraine. Who knows what is coming there? Keep that situation in your prayers. But does Putin survive that? Is there such discontent, perhaps, eventually growing within his regime, his inner circle, that Putin is ushered aside? And that's a nice way of putting it. We shall see. But there will be a leader from what the Bible says is the uttermost north of Israel that leads this confederation against the land of Israel in the latter days. And if you look on the map, the uttermost north of Israel would be Russia. Now, I know many and some of our commenters have said, no, we believe it's Turkey. And I certainly believe that Turkey will be a part of that confederation. And I don't think it's any coincidence that, as we've reported here in the newscast many times, we see Russia, Iran, Turkey coming together now at this point in history. Look, these were three nations that were at each other's throats historically, even fought wars against each other. Now we see Raisi, the Iranian president. We see Putin. We see Erdogan, the Turkish president, linking arms and joining hands and working together in unison. Hey, they don't agree on everything, but they agree on a lot of things. And they are an integral part of an anti-Western bloc, an anti-Western front that has formed over the past few years and which has gone into overdrive since Joe Biden took office here in Washington, D.C. in January 2021. Now, why? Why would the enemies of America, of Israel, of the free world gather and cleave so closely together at this moment in history? I don't think it takes a brain surgeon to see why. Weak leadership in Washington, D.C. is 1 and 1A in terms of the gathering storm that is coming together right now, led by Russia, China, and Iran. Make no mistake, but also including North Korea. There are reports this week that Russia is going to purchase a large amount of military hardware from North Korea. Obviously, as we reported on the newscast, Vladimir Putin recently purchased hundreds of attack drones from Iran, to the point where Russian soldiers are on the ground in Iran right now training on how to use those drones. The good news about that and the potential silver lining, as we discussed here last week, is that Russia reportedly is not very happy with the performance of those Iranian drones. Let's pray that continues to be the case and that these drones fail miserably, these Iranian-produced drones, not only when they're in the hands of Russia, but in the hands of Hezbollah, Hamas, the Houthis, Islamic Jihad, and Iran's other proxies across the region, which they are gleefully passing these drones off to. But the Afghanistan effect still lingers. Obviously, it's a little over 1 year ago. The U.S. Disgraceful withdrawal from Afghanistan, not the U.S. military, the decision makers who ordered that withdrawal and the way it was conducted. Hey, folks, that sent a message to the world that can really, as long as this administration is in power in D.C., that message, it can't be walked back now. The world smelled weakness. It continued to smell weakness. Iran, Russia, China, North Korea. We have Venezuela, other players on the periphery there, terror groups. Turkey, which is a NATO member in name only. I like to call Turkey, under Erdogan's radical leadership, NINO, NATO in name only. Sadly, Turkey was a loyal friend of the West, a great NATO nation, a friend of Israel, until around 2002 when Recep Erdogan came to power. So we have Turkey operating in bad faith, needless to say. And we saw another example this week of the growing coalition, the gathering storm, as one of my heroes, Winston Churchill, called the budding Nazi alliance or confederation back in the 1930s. No one else wanted to call it for what it was. Churchill called it like it was. This week, Russia held 7 days of war games. Well, it began on September 1st, these war games. They wrapped up today, Wednesday, September 7th, in the far eastern half of Russia, around Siberia, I presume. As I mentioned at the top, Vladimir Putin was there in person to watch China and Russia, their militaries, conduct joint drills together on Russian soil, in particular, the Russian and Chinese navies. Hey, Nicaragua was also there, a very bad actor, Daniel Ortega, a Marxist who's in power there in the Western Hemisphere at America's southern doorstep. Syria, surprise, surprise, also taking part in these war games, and former Soviet republics. But this was the precursor to 1 week from now, or is it 2 weeks? It's coming, know that, where Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping, the Chinese premier, will meet face-to-face in Uzbekistan. They'll be there as part of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization annual meeting. So they will meet, Putin and Xi, and that's never good. They'll meet face-to-face for the first time since February 2022 at the Beijing Olympics, just shortly before Russia invaded Ukraine. And I'm sure they didn't discuss that, or maybe they did. I'm being sarcastic. So now they're going to meet once again. This is actually Xi Jinping, his first foreign trip in 2.5 years. And One of the big items, the big reason for this trip, obviously, is a tete-a-tete with his comrade, Vladimir Putin. The two apparently enjoy a very warm relationship, according to reports out of Russia and China. Hey, let me catch my breath here real quick with a few reminders. Number one, thank you, everyone joining. I see a very active chat going on here right now. This is great. That's number one. Number two, if you have not subscribed, if you're here right now, I assume that you are a regular viewer of the Watchman. But if you're not and you have not subscribed yet, hey, be sure to join us here, stand shoulder to shoulder with us as a watchman, a watchwoman on the wall for such a time as this. Just click the subscribe button to join with nearly 500,000 watchmen and women on the wall right now. Unbelievable. We're at 477,000, which I just laugh and say, God, thank you. This channel is by God and for God. And as long as we stick to that, then God, I believe, will continue to grow and expand the message so more people can hear it around the world. And that's what it's all about, right? Again, for such a time as this. So be sure to subscribe. Be sure to click the notification bell so you get alerts every time a new video is posted. One more thing to mention, then I will move on, I promise. A premium membership. If you are with us every day and you love the channel, think about becoming a premium member. Just $4.99 a month. Number one, you help keep us on the air, which is great. Cover operating costs to keep this channel going in these Bible times in which we're living, prophetic times. So that's number one. Secondly, there's some pretty cool perks. We have the Watchman TV show, of course, on TBN every week. You get the exclusive first look as a premium member before anyone else. When a new episode hits the air, you will see it with some behind-the-scenes commentary from yours truly. And we've got some premium member live streams coming up. We're going to do one next week, I believe. So check that out. Just click join on the homepage for premium membership. Okay, that's the housekeeping. Now that's out of the way. Let's move on to, we've got a few more things to discuss before our Q&A. Be sure to send your questions as well, because we're getting to it soon. The Iran nuclear deal, what's the latest? And we've had so many stops and starts and so much hemming and hawing over the months about the Iran deal. There have been points over the past few months where that deal looked dead in the water, no doubt. And people said, well, it's not going to happen. Then there have been points, and we've been chronicling it for you all along the way. There have been points where it appeared very imminent. And we said, wow, this thing, it's coming. I mean, this week, days, if not weeks. And there always seems to be something to kind of rein it in and pull it back, at least momentarily. Now, we were getting very, very close last week, according to all reports out of Iran, out of Europe, out of the Biden administration, that things were getting very, very close. Okay, it looks like this thing's going to happen. God help us, because it's going to be a disaster. Now, in recent days, we are hearing that the Biden administration is not happy with Iran's response, and Iran's dragging its feet. It always seems to come up with some new demand. So it appears that the deal may be on hold for now. Key phrase there, for now. There's some rumblings now that it may not come to fruition until after the midterm elections here in the United States, which, remember, are November 8th. Not that far away. I believe it's 62 days, 63 days away. Another significant date to mark on your calendars, November 1st. That is the Israeli election. Will that also have bearing on the Iran nuclear deal? At this point, you're about 7 weeks out, 9 weeks out, I should say, from the midterm elections here in the US. You could look at it two ways. How is Biden looking at it and his team? Do they believe if the Iran deal is struck, if it is forged, signed before the midterms, that gives them a boost, that they can tout that as a foreign policy accomplishment? And look, we're accomplishing things on the world stage. We have a deal with Iran. Or much more likely, would the Biden administration say, uh-oh, we know this deal is a disaster. We're going to do it anyway, but we know it's a disaster. We know people aren't going to be happy about it. We're going to get slammed if we do this. Israel's going to vocally slam us if we do it right before the midterms. Not good. Maybe we should hold off until after the midterms and then announce it. no matter what happens in the midterms. I think the latter is more likely. Hey, I wouldn't be shocked if they announce it before the midterms. And if they think in some parallel universe that somehow the Iran deal, the second version of it, actually benefits them in the midterms, because they're just looking to score points for the midterms. Obviously, at this point, you're less than 2 months out. You're about 2 months out, almost exactly to the day. September 7th today, November 8th is the midterms. So what do they do? What does Iran do? Or I'm sorry, what does the Biden administration do before or after the midterms? That is the question. The question is not, in my view, ladies and gentlemen, will the Iran deal happen? Oh, I believe it's going to happen. But Iran is going to drag this out. And they've been dragging it out now for month upon month in Vienna and elsewhere. They're going to drag this out until they can get the maximum amount of concessions from the United States and from Europe, from the West. And guess who is cheerleading and prodding them on to drag it out? You guessed it, Russia, Iran's loyal friend. Remember, Russia and China are also involved in these nuclear negotiations. Hello. And Russia clearly enjoys the hand-wringing in Europe and the United States, the gnashing of teeth over the Iran nuclear threat. And Russia's saying, hey, continue to drag it out. Squeeze the West for everything you can get. Make their lives miserable for as long as you can, because clearly the West isn't going to walk away from the negotiating table. Folks, at this point, what could actually make America and Europe walk away? Think about it. The Iranian regime, through its proxies, has directly targeted U.S. troops in Syria and Iraq in recent weeks. They've tried to murder U.S. troops. And it's not a secret. This is not some whodunit. It's obvious who's behind it. So they're openly trying to murder American troops after, by the way, murdering over 600 U.S. troops between 2003 and 2011 in Iraq. Not only that, the Iranian regime is currently plotting, I assume still currently, as of a few weeks ago it was, plotting to assassinate former Trump administration officials on U.S. soil. That includes former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, former State Department official Brian Hook, and also John Bolton, the former National Security Advisor. This is not hearsay. The Biden administration has confirmed that, yes, the Iranian regime is trying to target former U.S. officials. And even that has not spurred the Biden administration to push away from the negotiating table and say, enough is enough, we're walking away for good. Folks, it is hard to see what would make this administration walk away from these talks at this point. And that's sad to say, but maybe it's December. Maybe it's what a Christmas gift. I'm joking, of course. Maybe it's December. Maybe it's early in the new year, but eventually I'm still banking on this Iran deal happening. I say that with devastation in my heart because, folks, it's going to be devastating. And just to do the quick cliff notes on the deal, then we'll get to questions. And I want to mention those archaeological discoveries. But what does the United States get out of the deal? I asked that question last week on the live stream. I'm asking again. If you've got anything, please contribute and let me know what the U.S. gets out of it. But in the meantime, I can tell you what the U.S. is giving. And what the U.S. is giving is billions of dollars, according to some estimates, at least $100 billion in sanctions relief per year. 100 billion per year. It could add up to 1 trillion before it's all said and done to the Iranian regime. That's number one. Number two, Iran is not in this deal required to give up or even slow down its ballistic missile program. And lastly, Iran's sponsorship for terrorism. Hamas, Islamic Jihad, the Houthis, Hezbollah, the Shia militias in Iraq and Syria, that's not on the table. So I can tell you what Iran gets out of the deal. Billions and billions of dollars in sanctions relief, which they will use to build more advanced weapons and supply to their proxies so they can have more advanced weapons, all with the goal of destroying Israel and the United States in the longer term. That's number one. Number two, the ballistic missile program along those lines continues unabated, including precision-guided missiles. And lastly, again, the proxies. The proxies are strengthened and emboldened. Hey, after that 2015 nuclear deal, the first incarnation of this deal was signed until President Trump rightly pulled out of it in 2018. After that deal was signed, Iran went on the march predictably across the region. Iran now effectively controls 4 Arab capitals: Sana'a in Yemen, Damascus in Syria, Baghdad in Iraq, and Beirut in Lebanon. They are Iranian satellites. Thank you, 2015 Iran nuclear deal, which only emboldened and empowered the Iranian regime. Well, let's get into questions. On that note, the 2 archaeological discoveries, man, oh man, we got to do questions now, but I do want to mention those real quick. It's cool stuff. I think you'll like this. The first one was last week at one of my favorite places in all of Jerusalem. And that's saying something. Probably my favorite place, the city of David, ancient Jerusalem. Get this, folks. Rare, I'm quoting here from Newsweek, rare ivory plaques dating back thousands of years. I'm just reading this from my phone. Thousands of years to the time of Solomon's temple, and are believed to have been a part of a throne, have been unearthed in Jerusalem. These rare ivory plaques could they have been part of King Solomon's throne, King Solomon himself? One of the experts who uncovered them said they were the first of their kind to be uncovered in the city of David in Jerusalem. The city of David is an archaeological site, of course, that was the original center of Jerusalem during the reign of King David and King Solomon. So that is very cool stuff. I am going to Israel soon, and I hope to get an up-close look at that. The second discovery, and then we'll get the questions, but I want to mention this because I think you'll like it. This just broke today, a 2,700-year-old inscribed papyrus, I'm sorry, not platypus, papyrus, a letter to Ishmael, written in early Hebrew script, is one of only 2 others from biblical times. And that's a fascinating one. The Israel Antiquities Authority from the First Temple period, a papyrus letter. Good stuff there. So again, God is moving today in the land of Israel, and one of the ways he's doing it is through biblical archaeology. He's bringing the Bible to life for such a time as this, and providing that irrefutable proof. Yes, this was and is always been my land. The Bible is true, and the people of the Bible were and are the people of Israel. And I brought them back in these latter days, and that's coming to life in places like the city of David today. It's exciting to see. Okay, questions. Let's see, folks. Okay. Just looking at the questions here. Give me 1 second. Someone asked, Scott G, is tourism fully open in Israel? Yes, it is, for everyone, vaccinated, non-vaccinated. Israel is completely open for everyone. Just so you know, Scott G, if you want to go, and I highly recommend it. He also asks, are there any pipelines, natural gas pipelines from Israel to Europe yet? Scott, not yet. Great question. As you all know, we reported this on the newscast. Israel and Egypt signed a deal with the European Union back in June to provide natural gas to Europe. And folks, they're going to need it. You've probably been hearing the rumblings about a very long, cold winter oncoming in Europe now that they have cut their energy supplies from Russia. So they are going to lean, I believe, in the future on Israel for natural gas. Israel has a lot of natural gas. It's a budding natural gas superpower. They don't have enough to completely, obviously, replace what Russia was providing Europe. 40% at least of Europe's total energy supply. Hard to believe that Europe allowed itself to get in that situation, but here we are. But Israel is going to step up and at least replace some of that. And guess what? Vladimir Putin's not going to like that very much. Some have said that natural gas and Israel's growing natural gas supplies could be one of the triggers, perhaps even the hook in the jaw we mentioned earlier for that Ezekiel invasion. Okay. Here we go. Let's get some more here. JT Trumpet 55 asks, Any update on new anti-drone technology, such as updated laser technology? Good question. It appears within the next year, according to Israeli officials. What he's referring to there, good question, is Operation, I believe it's Iron Beam, not Operation, Iron Beam anti-drone, anti-missile technology. You might say, what the heck is Iron Beam? I know about Iron Dome. Iron Dome, of course, the groundbreaking Israel anti-missile defense system with a 90% success rate, completely amazing. We've showed it to you up close here in the newscast and on the Watchman TV show, but Iron Beam literally is a laser-based missile defense system where, at the risk of sounding like Luke Skywalker, these are laser beams, which are literally going to knock drones, enemy drones, and enemy missiles out of the sky. That's the plan. And Israel has successfully tested it. And I believe in the next year or so, they want to kind of roll this Iron Beam system out. It's exciting and fascinating stuff. Leave it to Israel to just innovate. And it's much cheaper than Iron Dome, which is also obviously very important. Iron Dome is very expensive, folks. That's why there's not, hundreds of those Iron Dome batteries scattered all throughout Israel. They cost a lot of money. But Iron Beam apparently will be more cost effective. It's always fascinating to me that every time the enemy, and now it's drones, right? Every time Israel's enemies try some new terror tactic, Israel eventually is able to adjust to it. I think Iron Beam will help them to do that. Lipaz Dotan, our friend Lipaz, good to see you again, asks, are you planning to come and visit us in Israel again soon? I am, and I am going to do it soon. I will announce that soon. Not yet. I'm firming up some dates, but I will be back in the land soon, and I can't wait. I was in Israel in February 2022, of course, and also that amazing trip we had in late April where we hit 3 of the Abraham Accords nations, Bahrain, the United Arab Emirates, and we wrapped up in Israel. And that was fascinating. We had that off-the-record meeting with former and perhaps future Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, among others. So we'll be back soon to my second home, Jerusalem, and I cannot wait. Let's see what else we have here. Eleanor Rector, who is a premium member, as well as Lipaz, thank you both for premium membership there. Ask, what can we do to help Israel, all of our viewers here, subscribers, and Ukraine and Afghanistan, organizations? Wow, there are many, Eleanor. That's a great question. Number one, first and foremost, and I don't mean to sound trite, but please keep these nations in your prayers. We are biblically mandated to pray for the peace of Jerusalem, of course, Ukraine, Afghanistan. Pray for the peace of these nations. Pray for the believers there. Pray for everyone there, and pray for peace to prevail there. That's number one. Number two, in terms of organizations, twofold here. When it comes to Ukraine and Afghanistan, just off the top of my head, I think of Samaritan's Purse. Franklin Graham's great organization, Samaritan's Purse, always doing incredible work in hot spots like Afghanistan, Ukraine. So I'd look Samaritan's Purse up online for sure. And secondly, for Israel, there are multiple organizations. I think of Meir Panim, who you've heard us talk about here on the newscast, MEIR, Panim, PANIM, which it's amazing. There are some 2 million Israelis that live below the poverty line, including 1.1 million children. I was just looking over these statistics as we build on our partnership with Meir Panim. 1 out of every 3 Holocaust survivors in Israel living under the poverty line. So Meir Panim is an organization which is feeding the hungry and helping the needy, including, again, children, Holocaust survivors in Israel, with these incredible soup kitchens where these are comfortable dining areas with good food. I've seen it up close. You've probably seen it on the Watchman, where I helped serve Holocaust survivors, which was completely humbling, folks. And I did that through Meir Panim. So Eleanor, I encourage you to check Meir Panim out. That is a great organization doing God's work. And you're fulfilling the biblical mandate to bless Israel, truly. So check them out. Okay, let's see what else we have here. Pookie Martinez. Pookie, what up, man? Question. Psalm 83. Oh, man. Some say 1948. Some say 1967. Some say it's a future war. And some say it's a prayer of Asaph. What is your thought? Pookie, I had to answer it because everyone wants to know about Psalm 83, it seems. my thought is that I shared my thought on this when I had Bill. I'm jogging my memory what exactly I said. Bill Salas, back in July, we had him on. We did an entire segment, Pookie, about Psalm 83. My thought is that the Great Northern War that we've talked about here in the newscast seems to have elements that line up with Psalm 83. But as Bill Salas laid out, there are other elements in Psalm 83 that I just can't see. Bill believes that as part of Psalm 83, the Saudis will get involved, Egypt will get involved, Jordan will get involved, aligned apparently with the likes of Hamas, Hezbollah, Iranian proxies. I just can't see that right now. I can't see the Saudis, Egypt, and Jordan unless they have radical changes in leadership and radical Islamists come to power. I just can't see those three Sunni Arab nations, which have stood in a coalition alongside Israel, the UAE, Bahrain, against that Iranian axis. I can't see them suddenly joining with it against Israel for a Psalm 83 war. So I think that Great Northern War that I've talked about, where Israel faces off against that ring of fire, which includes the Houthis to the extreme south in Yemen, not too extreme, about 1,000 miles to the south of Eilat in Israel, Hamas, Islamic Jihad, obviously in Gaza, Hezbollah in southern Lebanon, the Shia militias in Iraq and Syria, and also the Assad regime in Syria and Iran, the ring of fire that surrounds Israel. And the war will be sparked in the north, and the bulk of fighting will take place in the north, I believe, in Syria and Lebanon. That's why I call it the Great Northern War. I believe that's a precursor to the Ezekiel War. Is that Psalm 83? There are some elements, again. Psalm 83 mentions Philistia, which would be Gaza. It mentions Tyre and Sidon, which would be Lebanon. Some things line up and some things don't. So is it just a prayer, a general prayer, kind of summarizing Israel's enemies? Was it fulfilled in 1967, as many believe? 67, I would say more so than 48 may be more likely. But Bill Salas made a fascinating point on Psalm 83 that the Psalm seems to say that these forces are not completely decisively defeated and that they come to fight another day. So that's a long-winded answer for Psalm 83. I'm leaning towards it being already fulfilled. But perhaps this Great Northern War that I believe is coming will turn out to be the Psalm 83 war. It's one I think that's vexed a lot of people who've studied the Bible. Is this in the future? Did it already happen? Is it just a prayer, generally talking about Israel's enemies? This is one I can speak definitively. Isaiah 17, Ezekiel 38, 39. My opinion. We all have different views of biblical prophecy, how it's going to play out, and it's fascinating to discuss it. But Psalm 83 is one where I'm saying, man, what exactly? Where does it fall on the prophetic timeline? Did it happen? Will it happen? So that's one that I also go back and forth on. Hey, which is good. I don't know everything, and I'm humble enough, I hope, to admit it. So, but Psalm 83 is one I have strong thoughts on, obviously. And Bill, I encourage you to check out the newscast that we did with Bill Salas. I believe it was around the 4th of July holiday. Go back in our archives under newscast, and that was a fascinating conversation with Bill Salas. And you make the call, see what you think. Read Psalm 83 and read the current headlines and what's shaping up, and let me know what you think. I'd actually love to hear your thoughts on this, folks. And maybe we'll have Bill Salas, my good friend, who's a great guy, have him back on to discuss it again. What do you think? Leave some comments there and let us know. Okay. Let's see what we have here. Pookie Martinez asks, will you be hanging out with Amir Sarfati while in Israel? I hope. I want to make that happen. I've had Amir on the show. If you don't know Amir, he runs a great channel called Behold Israel, doing great work. Be sure to subscribe to Behold Israel as well. We love what Amir's doing. So hopefully I see him in person finally in Israel. We've done some stuff via satellite that you can check out here in the newscast, which was great, but nothing beats being in the land of Israel on the ground, shoulder to shoulder with someone. So hopefully we can make that happen. I'll keep you guys posted on that as well. Okay. Rod O'Connor asks, Eric, what's stopping Russia from supplying Iran with nukes? I think if you're Russia, Rod, and other people have asked this, I think if you're Russia, first and foremost, Russia is not an Islamic nation. Now, by and large. Now, that has not stopped Russia from aligning itself with radical Islamists like the Iranian regime and like Hezbollah. That said, if you're Russia, you have to have in the back of your head, and they're not dumb. The Russian leadership are not stupid. In the back of your head, you have to be thinking, okay, we're going to align ourselves with Iran. It's a close alliance. But do we really trust apocalyptic jihadis with nuclear weapons? If I'm Russia, I'm saying, what's to say that they won't eventually turn those missiles on us? The current Ayatollahs are bad enough. Suppose someone even more extreme than Ayatollah Khamenei comes to power, who doesn't like any non-Muslims, including Russians. And all of a sudden he's got nuclear weapons. Suppose he points them at Moscow as well. So I think that's got to be in the back of the heads of the Russians. It would be pretty short-sighted for them to supply a radical Islamic regime with an apocalyptic ideology with nuclear weapons, especially when Iran is very close in proximity to Russia, of course. But that hasn't stopped Russia, sadly, from having an alliance with the Iranian regime. An alliance and sharing drone technology and military hardware, missiles is one thing. Supplying Iran with nuclear weapons is another thing. Iran has helped them to build Russia has been helping them to build nuclear reactors, but to actually give them warheads and give them the bomb, wow, that's a step up where Russia certainly would have to really think long and hard about that, because again, it might eventually boomerang back on them depending on who's in power in Tehran. Interesting question though. Unfortunately, we have to wrap this up because I have a family commitment, and I'll leave it at that. It's a good thing. I have to do some all you parents and grandparents probably know when your kids play sports, you're kind of a chauffeur and you're driving around here and there and everywhere, picking them up, driving them. It's a blessing. I'm not complaining. I love it. So got to do that right now. But we've had close to a solid hour here. This was great. We went for 53 minutes, and we'll do it again next Wednesday, and we'll do it tomorrow for our regular newscast here in the channel. So tune in tomorrow right here. Again, subscribe if you have not subscribed. We'd love to have you. We're bringing you cutting edge information for such a time as this every single day here in the channel. So join with us. We'd love to have you. God bless you all. Until tomorrow, thanks for joining us. And remember, never hold your peace. Hey everyone, thanks for checking out the Watchman Newscast. If you enjoyed this episode and want to see more, make sure you go ahead and hit the like button, click subscribe, and tap the bell icon to turn on notifications for new Watchman Newscast episodes every weekday.